Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for Monday, March 18th, 2019. Hello, I'm Dr. Avis, in for Roland Martin. He'll be back tomorrow. After white nationalists killed 50 Muslims in 2 mosques in New Zealand, Donald Trump says white nationalism is not really a problem. Of course he said that, right? He is the problem, right? Terrorism expert Malcolm Nance talks to Roland about the worldwide threat of white nationalism, especially here in America. White supremacy takes many forms, not just murder, like the white woman who went on a racist rant in a Connecticut supermarket. We've got the shocking video. A new report out today on the state of black women in America. We are short on wages and wealth, but let me tell you, we are long on political power. We'll break it down with our panel and Latasha Brown, the one and only co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She will also give us her grassroots reaction to 3 stories in our continuing effort to secure the vote in the face of Republicans trying to suppress the vote. And we'll examine the safety of air travel now that the 737 MAX has been grounded. It's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Hello, I'm Dr. Avis, in for Roland Martin. He'll be back tomorrow. 50 people were murdered last week in 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. The shooter was a self-described white nationalist, or as we call them on Roland Martin Unfiltered, a racist white terrorist. In his racist manifesto, the shooter cites Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose. Trump downplays white nationalism as a threat.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
Yeah, those few people can sure do a lot of damage. 50 people at mosques in New Zealand, 9 people at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, 11 people at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, 2 people at that Kroger supermarket parking lot in Kentucky. And that's not all. Right-wing extremists were linked to at least 50 murders last year, a 35% increase over 2017, according to the Anti-Defamation League that tracks these events. And there are reports that the House Judiciary Committee will hold hearings in the next few weeks on the rise of white nationalism. Of course, the big question is Trump to blame for the rise of white nationalism and white nationalist violence? Before we ask the panel about this, here is what David Leonhardt of the New York Times wrote this morning. Drawing a direct line from the purveyors of hateful rhetoric to any specific hate crime is usually impossible. And it's usually a mistake to try. The motive for these crimes, be it in New Zealand last week or Pittsburgh last year, is typically a stew of mental illness, personal anger, and mixed up ideology. Trump doesn't deserve to be blamed for any specific crime, but he does deserve to be blamed for the trend. It's very complicated. The man with the world's largest bully pulpit keeps encouraging violence and white nationalism. Lo and behold, white nationalist violence is on the rise. You have to work pretty hard to persuade yourself that's just a big coincidence. So joining us on the panel today to talk about it is Monique Presley, a legal analyst and crisis manager, Michael Brown, former vice chair of the DNC Finance Committee, and Eugene Craig, CEO of the Eugene Craig Organization. Welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, appreciate it.
So what are your thoughts about what's going on here? You know, to me, it's very interesting that Trump was specifically named in the manifesto, yet he keeps acting as if, why am I even mentioned in the same breath as this murderer? What are your thoughts on his responsibility for these acts?
Well, of course he has responsibility, but it's the same as everything else that he has responsibility for, and he's taken none. He's supposedly the President of the United States, the so-called leader of the free world, and he's never accepted that mantle. He has continued to behave over and over again like an infant. You know, I mean, he has such juvenile behavior. He does things that my young children think are just absurd. So for him to actually accept responsibility for the fact that the hate that he puts out can lead to an extreme group of people taking action, no, I'm not surprised at all that he is unwilling to do that.
Absolutely. And Michael, not so long ago, you remember when he came out and called himself a nationalist? You know, it's very interesting that he specifically used that language. And now we have this yet another murderous action by a white nationalist. He's still trying to say, oh, I had nothing to do with that.
Well, first, Dr. Avis, let me first commend you for coming in hurt and sick and doing a wonderful job. Roland, if you're watching, look what a professional.
I'm trying to figure out what Avis is turning up. That's what I probably need to be.
But you know, I'm sure someone has kept count, whether it's the Anti-Defamation League, but it seems to me there are so few attacks by Arab Americans,
right,
or Arabs, or however the president liked to refer to them, and more by just white people.
Absolutely.
By white men that just want to go to a hotel, open up a window, and start shooting people in a crowd. That's terrorism.
It is.
And every time this happens, he ignores it because, you know, clearly he knows that he's part of the problem. I don't think he ever thought people would really go to this level. Clearly he wants to inspire his people.
Right.
But I don't think he ever thought people would go out with guns and start killing people. But that's what they're doing.
What do you think, Eugene?
I think he actually does, to be honest with you. I mean, if you go back to the campaign, you know, literally at the rallies, he would say, you know, hey, you know, back in my day, you know, they can get beat up and taken down the stretcher. And he would tell his folk, you know, well, if you beat them up, I'll pay your legal bills. I think it's kind of irrational to expect the trash-ass racist to, you know, kind of rebuke other trash-ass racists.
That's true.
And, you know, when you have folk that are committing crimes and killing people and literally bringing the white supremacy and white supremacist terrorism real to real lives, you can't, I mean, I thought it was weird. And then I had to take a step back that Mick Mulvaney's first response to, you know, the question of should the president give a speech denouncing white supremacy is, oh, the president's not a white supremacist.
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't not like Muslims.
Well, Eugene, we have a little clip from Mick Mulvaney. Let's see what he said. Let's look at his excuse.
The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that.
You have to say it until he starts acting like he's not, because clearly he's been acting like he's not from day one. What I find that he is from day one, what I find very interesting is one of the first things that this administration did was they cut funding for being able to track white nationalist, white supremacist groups. At the very same time, they established this ridiculous focus on black identity extremists. Yeah. We've known for the last 3 years, we have seen increases in white nationalist violence. We've seen a 17% increase in white nationalist violence just between last year and this year. The problem is here. The problem is getting worse. They're wasting resources looking for black folks when it's these crazy, I wouldn't even say crazy, that gives them an out.
No,
evil white men killing people of color, killing Jewish people all over this nation and the world. When will we correct what's gone horribly wrong with this administration? What can we do as citizens to move this administration and let them know that they need to change their focus?
All right, well, the trend for this homebred terror for young white men, especially young white men between the ages of 18 and 24, predates the Trump administration. And they've been studying it supposedly for a while, and I do think, yes, it's kind of like axis of evil-ish, but there is sickness, and they have not figured out what's going wrong with that demographic that is leading to them being the predominant factor. I mean, we don't even have to guess now. When we see that there's been some mass shooting, we pretty much know what that's about, and it doesn't look anything like everything everything this administration is flagging. But what this administration is doing is just feeding the base.
Right.
I mean, they just feed the monster and feed the monster and feed the monster, and it has not. They're not tethered to facts.
Right.
You know, they don't believe in data or science or any of those things. It doesn't matter. Down is up and up is down. So whatever it is that serves their purpose of the day or the moment, that's what they go with, and that could change tomorrow.
Well, this is an administration that's been full of white supremacists. Look, Malcolm Nance talked to Roland about this. We will listen to that, and then we'll come back and continue the discussion.
Really need to understand that we are operating in white fear right now. We've always had that. But the reality is, with America becoming a nation, majority people of color in 2043, you look at what's happening in France and other countries, there's all this fervor when it comes to immigration. This is really white folks globally being afraid of the future, what the demographics look like.
You're absolutely right. And it's not a recent fear. This is certainly in the United States with the white supremacy movement. Well, technically, you could say that its heyday was the U.S. Civil War. But in the period afterwards, and, you know, with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and then the civil, you know, as it descended into the civil rights movement, the 1950s were actually very, very significant in terms of intellectualizing the fear of immigrants, blacks, browns, and others in the United States and coming into the United States. And you might recall, Roland, there was a movement back in the 1950s called the John Birch Society.
Yep.
And the Birchers were a group of white supremacist, aligned neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klansmen, and white upper middle class and middle class who believed in white supremacy as, you know, almost a form of corporatism. Now, because the World War II saw the rise of fascism, they didn't want to take on the symbols of fascism. They maintained that America itself was a uniquely white identity. And they were, of course, thoroughly sidelined leading up into the, you know, the nomination of Barry Goldwater for president in the 1960s. They were sidelined. Only until the period of Donald Trump had groups like the John Birch Society just been ignored.
Right.
Now they're mainstreamed.
And in fact, Congressman Benny Thompson has sent a letter to the FBI and Department of Justice saying that they have failed to brief lawmakers on the fact that more domestic terrorism suspects, white folks, were arrested in the United States over the last 2 years than foreign Islamic extremists.
Absolutely. And last year, not one American was killed in an act of terrorism in the United States by a foreign or foreign-inspired extremist. But there were numerous Americans massacred, most notably the massacre in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, which was carried out by a pro-Trump white nationalist, and the attempted bombing and decapitation of the entire Democratic Party establishment by that amateur bomber out of Florida. This isn't new, but, you know, in the 1990s, we had a huge boom. In 1980s and 90s, there was a huge boom of militiamen and white supremacist-backed groups who were going to, you know, prepare themselves for the white, you know, versus black race war. Timothy McVeigh's bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City was precisely that. He expected that when he blew that building up, his book, The Turner Diaries, the one that he loved and loved reading, was supposed to be the clarion call for all whites in the military to take their guns and mass murder the blacks in the military and thus start a race war.
On that very point, the HuffPost investigation has identified 7 U.S. military members who belong to a white nationalist group. ProPublica has also identified the white nationalists. And so we have individuals right now who are serving in the United States military who they've aligned themselves with white nationalists, with neo-Nazi groups, and it is a problem as we speak.
Yeah, and it's old school, too, because you know, the neo-Nazis front other groups, you know, the more traditionalist groups that have gone out of existence, like very little known groups, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, you know, which was an all-white Southern group, which was advocating for, you know, civil war in the United States. They said everyone should go into the military to gain those ground skills, and then you can come out and train people. There's a militia right now, an anti-government militia, pro-Trump, but anti-government, that is being trained by ex-special forces soldiers to be prepared for the coming civil war, or, which is now being masked in that if Trump gets denied a second term, right? Well, we all know what it's really for. Another interesting thing is, I'm a gun guy, right? I have guns. I practice, because I used to live over in the Middle East. So these things were a tool of my intelligence and military trade. But, when these people talk about zombie targets and zombie-type ammunition, they're not talking about from The Walking Dead. They're referring to that as when rule of law collapses in a national crisis. The zombies are the black and brown people they expect to come from the cities. And, this is how they think. And now they think that they have a presidential champion that will turn the military and biker gangs to their advantage in a race war.
So true. We have another crazy-ass white people story for you. Let's go to the video.
No charcoal grills are allowed.
I'm white. I got you, huh?
Illegally selling water without a permit
On my property.
Whoa! Hey! Give us your right.
You don't live here.
I'm uncomfortable.
So when the president is racist, it encourages others to be as well. On Friday night, a white woman in East Haven, Connecticut, continually called a black couple the N-word and even spat at them while shopping in a grocery store. Take a look. Warning, the language is unfiltered.
You were one of those permanently, motherfucker.
Eric.
Go ahead, I will.
Do it.
Sit down. You dare talk to me in front of my kids like that, motherfucker.
Call the cops because you threatened me.
Watch this. It's not even worth it. What? It's threatening. They're niggers. That's why, because they're fucking niggers in these states.
Oh, don't say that.
Eric! Put your hands on me. Come on.
Eric.
Put your hands on me. Put them on me.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry. I don't
Come on. Eric.
You motherfucker.
Eric.
You motherfucker.
I'm a nigger, right?
Eric, motherfucker. That's right. You're a nigger in East Haven.
Please.
Watch this, motherfucker.
Eric, go sit down.
Fuck you, nigger.
Eric.
Motherfucker. Motherfucker. You motherfucker.
Wow. She gonna try that with the wrong person one day. That's all I got to say. Okay, so this woman has been identified as Corrine Tyrone. I almost said Tyrone, who worked as a secretary of Hampden High School in Connecticut until she resigned after the video went viral. The Hampden Public School Superintendent, Joni Goler, released a statement identifying Tyrone in the video and saying that the employee has been separated from employment immediately. The school district also filed a report from the Department of Children and Families. Since Tyrone's children were present during her traumatic tirade, charges have not been filed against Tyrone as of yet. So, when I see things like this, I think, first of all, her children were very calm.
They didn't even flinch.
Because that's not new.
Exactly.
Motherfucker might be their middle name.
You don't just start doing that one day at the store. I mean, they know who their mother is.
Black people.
Yeah.
Mommy probably pops off not just about black people.
Yeah, right.
That is a pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
That is a character demonstration. That's a way of living. And I hope that they need to call the people on her, CBS and everybody else.
Do we know what started it?
I have no idea. I haven't seen anything about what started it.
But listen, I need her to be in the right place, in the right jurisdiction, in the right store, and let that happen. Like I think at some point in time, I don't advocate violence, but I believe Monique can correct me. I believe once you get spat on, that is an assault, and I think you should have a right to properly defend yourself. And these hands work perfectly.
Well, you bring up a good point about where these things are done.
Yeah.
Because whenever we see these things, they happen in situations where they know they are in, quite frankly, a majority white situation.
Yep.
I found it interesting that the man came up at the end and was working towards the black couple as if to hold them back when she was the one demonstrating violence,
Yep.
right? And so she felt comfortable in that environment to be aggressive.
Oh, when she
to
got
be
the crowd,
violent.
she turned it up.
Yeah.
It went from, she actually, like, turned away. It was like kind of walking away, and it came back and said, nah, I got some more for you, baby.
Yeah.
She got a crowd. And, look, I think, there should be there should be a database of these people. And, employers should check it to make sure that, hey, look, you're not hiring an avowed racist, representing your brand, your company, and interacting with your customers.
And we're seeing this more and more and more because people still feel comfortable because number 45 has set a tone that it's okay. If you see somebody you don't like, just go spit on them.
Yeah.
Tell them you don't like them. Call them a name. It's okay because I do it from the Oval Office, so what's the problem?
What I find interesting, too, is that the majority of these are women.
Yes.
The majority of these are angry white women.
Yes.
I'm like, what the hell do they have to be so angry about? What do you think is the psyche
Well,
going on with white women right now?
The thing that's interesting about it is, of course, that's how we ended up with this, one of the ways that we ended up with this president,
Absolutely.
right? A cool assist from Russia. But some people were so disappointed with the vote from the white women. I was not. I was not surprised by that at all because there's a party line that lines up behind their husbands and where they think that whatever has happened, whether it's losing coal jobs, whether it's the way that their husband feels in the economy, which ends up coming back to them because that it all goes downhill. You come in, you're in the house, you hit the wife hits the kids kick the dog. I mean, that's what happens. And so these women are living the same lives as their angry male counterparts, but they are wiling out and acting out because I guess they think that they're not going to have the same kinds of consequences that a male would popping off like that.
Absolutely. They're going to hide behind their female veneer and say, you won't hit me.
Right.
So I can do anything I want to do. I can say anything I want to say. I can even hit you or spit at you or threaten to perpetuate violence against you. But you can't do anything to me because I'm a delicate white woman. Do you think that's what's going on here?
Clearly, and we see it happens all the time when in the same kind of assault situation, even if a black woman don't get treated like white women do.
Absolutely
and it's
not.
just the parity. It's just not, the whole system is not fair. So you're right. They feel empowered.
I agree 100%. I really think, if you want to pop off, do it with the right crowd, the right people. My thing is this: if you're going to pop off, get your full value of pop off out of it. Get your full value out of it. If you want to pop off, don't do it in this nice, safe space, controlled environment. No, take your ass to Southeast, West Baltimore, Compton, wherever, and pop off. You can get hundreds of people you can pop off on and have the pop off experience of your life.
The problem is they're cowards.
I agree.
That's why they won't do it.
I agree 100%.
Absolutely. So we'll go to a quick break, but we'll be right back.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
All right, so the Black Women's Roundtable Convention is going on in Washington, D.C. right now. We've been live streaming these events from Friday to today, including a session this morning on the annual report, Black Women in the United States. So proud to be the editor of that report. Happy that it's out again this year. There are two findings I want to talk about: our growing political power and the fragile nature of Black women's wealth. Let's start there with these facts. Black women are workers. In fact, more of us are working on a percentage basis than white women, and that's been the case forever, right? But because we work and we work hard, we have to be twice as good. Doesn't mean we're getting fairly paid. Black women working full-time year-round earn only 61 cents for every dollar earned by white male workers compared to 77 cents for white women. And according to the report, over the course of our working years, that means that we lose nearly $1 million throughout our career. And that results in a large wealth gap as well. Married Black women with college degrees have less than half as much wealth as married white women with college degrees. And let me tell you, when we get towards retirement age, that gap actually increases. It does not decrease. So I want to talk to the panel about these findings. It's really quite amazing. You know, when I look at these numbers every year, on the one hand, I'm excited because I see us moving forward, particularly with political representation this year. We've been moving, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But when I see these economic numbers, it's very disturbing to me because nobody works harder than black women. And to see us continually get economically exploited in this nation, it's very frustrating. What can we do in order to wield more economic power?
You know, we've always been in last place. And it concerns me greatly because I'm talking since slavery, right? And we've had to be industrious because we were put in the last slot every place else. And so part of our surge and our success is that ingrained fighter spirit that overcomes and is resilient. But I don't believe that there's enough collaboration.
Right.
Because we have a lot more economic power than what would be evident by the way the numbers keep coming in. And I don't think we can expect for our white and other minority counterparts to do more for us than we do for us. So things like the Black Women's Roundtable, moving forward in business markets and moving forward in educational markets, I mean, we have to become our own lobbyists. I know that's a bad word now. We have to become our own advocates.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that we're in the marketplace by grouping together.
Absolutely.
You know, it can't be done in silos and it can't be done as an island.
Absolutely. And when I think about some more data that we released in this report, what's really going on here is that as black women, we're disproportionately represented in low-wage jobs, jobs that don't have a lot of the basic benefits that a lot of higher wages jobs have just off the top. Because we don't have then access to things like health care, we don't have access to other things, we end up coming out of pocket to pay for those. Part of what we report here is that black women spend about 40% of our income on caregiving for others, okay?
Right.
As compared to white women who only spend about 14% of our income on caregiving.
But we don't just end up paying for our own health care, we end up dying.
Absolutely.
More of us die in childbirth.
Absolutely.
More of us die with heart disease.
Absolutely.
More of us, you know, I mean, and depression. They're looking at those numbers now and things that are, and so again, it's just like I said with the white women, we deal with some of the in the last seat, we get kicked before they kick the dog mentality, in that there's been a perpetuation of black men being in prison, and that destroyed the black community through over-incarceration, and we were left to carry the bag, and that meant taking whatever job you could get in order to feed a family because there was no man in the home.
Yep.
So everything,
and that's another drain on our income.
Yes.
Because we're putting money in there for them.
Yes.
We're also paying exorbitant rates for phone calls. I mean, it's all, everybody's getting rich off of our dollars.
You know that the penal system is making a ridiculous amount of money off of families, and it's a higher per capita percentage of people of color.
Absolutely. And I want to bring the brothers in this conversation because I feel like I get very disturbed. Yeah, they're my brothers, right? I get very disturbed when I hear so much animosity between black men and black women. And, you know, I don't even want to take blame. Sometimes we're the aggressors, sometimes y'all the aggressors. It just happens, right? Depending upon the subject. But the bottom line is, I feel like we need to understand as one people that we can't do any of this by ourselves, that we get so much further if we work together, black men and black women. What can black men do to support black women in these ways, and how can we also support you?
I think we start with just supporting black women. You know, we talk a lot of politics here. I thought it was disgusting the way, I'll call it out, I think it's absolutely disgusting the way Sean King's, you know, addressing Kamala Harris right now, and, you know, doing Bernie's bidding.
Right.
I think black men have an obligation to support black women. Black women have been saving, you know, our communities, been saving families, been saving this country for 400 years now. You know, and part of that is because of systemic racism. Part of that because of the way the country, you know, laws and policies have been implemented. You know, the prison system has done a hell of a job in decimating the black community. But the number one thing black men can simply do is simply be there and support black women. You know, support their businesses, support them in what they do, support them in their political endeavors. And a lot of that, all that does is help rebuild the black community.
Absolutely.
As a whole. So.
I mean, a lot of it has to do, too, with recognition. We always talk about how the white community doesn't understand what people of color did to help build this country. And I think as men, and black men in particular, we have to also recognize and appreciate what black women have done throughout history, not just for our families. I'm going way back, like slave days, how black women kept families together all the way through the Civil War, helping people escape slavery, keeping families together because of our foolishness in the household. I know you wanted to give credit on both sides, but men have really not done our part. And I mean, growing up, and then you have to be the kind of parent. Growing up, my sister's career, her education was just as important as mine. Her going to law school was just as important as me going to law school. Everything was the same. So I was raised, so we have to do the same kind of raising of our children.
Absolutely.
That woman, her career, her ambition is just as important as yours.
I love that.
My great-grandmother taught me to cook and clean, because she said, I don't want you having to rely on a woman to do that for you. You can do it yourself. So there's some things, that values we have to kind of instill in our young people.
Absolutely. Perfect. Let's move on to the second topic, but still under this rubric, and that's black political power. We are now joined by LaTosha Brown here in the studio. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter and has been organizing black women and others to vote all throughout the South. LaTosha Brown, welcome to the studio for Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's get right to it. 50 years ago, Shirley Chisholm was the first black woman in Congress. Now there are 25 black women in Congress. Of the 5 new black female members elected in 2018, none represent a majority black district. 4 out of 5 represent suburban rather than urban districts. And we know that Stacey Abrams lost in Georgia's governor's race just by 55,000 votes in a state where her opponent did everything under the sun in order to steal that election. But a black woman won the race for Attorney General in New York State, and Letitia James is making life miserable for Trump and investigating in his business and his foundations. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with Black Voters Matter, LaTosha, in order to break through voter suppression in the South.
You know, I think one of the pieces when we think about voting and we think about power, it's not just the participation. It's actually having a framework of how are you going to build political infrastructure so that there is independent power. And normally what happens in terms of infrastructure, you either have political candidates that create the infrastructure or you have political parties, not necessarily the people. And so our work has really been grounded in how do we get grassroots groups and organizations and the ecosystem, right, of black folks on the ground to have their own infrastructure so that politically that the power rests with them, not hoping that they'll pick the right candidate to do the right thing, but that in fact that you see a pipeline of candidates come out, you see accountability, and you see it beyond participation. And I often like to say that because I think we have to make this distinction that participation in itself does not necessarily just equate to power,
Absolutely.
right? And we know that even in the state of Mississippi, we know that black women in Mississippi have the highest voting turnout than anybody in the country, right? But when you look at some of the economic disparities and some of the other policy issues that they're facing, we recognize that participation is one part. It's a very, very key and important part, but it's one part. So much of our work that we're doing with Black Voters Matter Fund is one, providing some resources for grassroots groups on the ground, but also having a conversation around strategy, around power that is beyond participation.
I love that. So when we think about black voter power lying in the hands of the voters rather than institutions, rather than any political party, what are you doing sort of in the off season? Because one of my frustrations is that typically there is like a mad rush at the end to sort of mobilize the black vote instead of investing in these communities so that people can really wield their power year round, 365 days a year. So what are you doing right now with Black Voters Matter to ferment that so that our powers can strengthen for 2020, but also beyond 2020?
You know, we created the organization specifically for that reason, that there was this very episodic, we call it bean counting, you know, round the beans up at the last minute, right? And that there wasn't an ongoing kind of strategic investment and strategy around how do you build power in communities. So there are a couple of things that we're doing in the off season. One, it all boils down to who is organized, like getting people organized and helping to build the capacity of the organizations in a number of ways, from training to actually investment in those organizations. organizations, to helping to build out those networks, to actually having a plan of action, a strategic, coordinated plan for future elections. The other thing that I think oftentimes happens in this space is that there's this fallacy that the way that engagement happens is that people is the top of the ticket that's going to drive. We've seen actually the opposite. We actually did some data in Alabama where we looked at Lowndes County, which is a small black belt county, and in that county, what we saw was only 6,000 voters in that county. What we would see in consecutive gubernatorial elections, that from the primary to the governor's race, there was a drop off of 1,000 voters. That's a lot of voters in a county that only has 6,000 voters. But essentially what winds up happening is the greatest opportunity to engage people is on the when there's a local election in a local race, so that they would get engaged in the primary. So the idea of the power and people interest is the top of the ticket down. We see across the board that that's not necessarily in our community, but that it really is from the bottom up and local. And if you really think about it, if you're telling people, when people lose control of their local school board, it's hard for them to get excited about the governor's election, right?
Yeah.
When they lose control of their county commission. So often the power that is closest to them, that actually impacts their day-to-day life, that's where a lot of the energy is. And so what we've been doing is doing a strategy aligned with these communities on what races they think are important, right? So that we're supporting their infrastructure, we're supporting their strategies around that. I think the other thing we have to do, and I think we've been doing this as well, is really thinking about local governance and self-governance. What does it mean? It's one thing for us to respond to what's happening. It's another thing for us to have a conversation, one, about power, around shifting the dynamics of power, about even shifting the infrastructure so that it is more fair. It's more fair. With one of the groups that we've been working with in Knoxville, Tennessee, they're actually looking at, it's called the Knoxville City Council Movement. They've actually been looking at the city council and running for seats so that they can actually take over the city council and restructure it in a way that is actually more responsive and accountable to the people. That's where we got to be thinking. We've got to not just be responding to how do I get into your party, but we've got to set the table to our own party and really be able to do things that we're talking about local governance, what's our vision for community, and how do we see power in a way that really is rooted in an equity lens, an equity and racial justice lens.
Absolutely. Any questions from the panel?
I had one. What do you do to engage voters? Because one of the things that bothers me the most is not just that people skipped out on voting for a president this last election, but in conversations I have, I can't get them to understand you have no idea what's going on at the local level and how much that matters to you. So for you to say your vote doesn't matter because one politician is the same as the other on a national level is absurd when you think about the fact that you've got like 6,000 people and every single election in that city matters.
Right. You know what's really interesting is I remember when I first started learning how to do organizing, and someone would tell me they didn't vote because they didn't think it mattered, and I would stand there until I would like turn purple to try to convince them how it mattered. And one day there was a young man who said something around why he didn't think that voting mattered, and it was so compelling that it actually, I didn't have a comeback, right? And I had to sit back and I had to think about it. And I'm raising that because some of the frustration that our people are feeling right now is authentic, and it is grounded, and it's legitimate, right? And so instead of running away from that, right, I think there's been a couple of approaches of getting people to vote. One, oftentimes in our community, we use fear. You know, they're going to come shut down, they're going to take this off, they're going to, at some point when people have just been bombarded with negative messages and negative images and fear, you can't, at some point you got to cut that off, right? So we actually shifted the frame. We shifted the frame from fear to love and power. And say that ultimately you have power, that you can change your community. We will actually talk them through that process. A second thing that we do is when someone says, you know, I don't think that voting matters, right? We don't argue with them. We say, you know what? And I'll say this. I'll say, I understand, because oftentimes I feel that way, right? And so when you start from a place of having an authentic conversation with our people, you can actually engage them in a way because they know that you're coming to them real. And then so oftentimes, even in that space, I'll say, while I understand your frustration, because I feel the same frustration, if someone is trying to break in my house and all I have is a hammer And I might not have a gun, I might not have the tool that I want or the weapon that I want, but all I got a hammer. You need to be clear, I'm going to use that hammer to hit him in the head, right?
Right.
And so when you frame it that to understand and to really speak to recognizing there are limitations in the vote. It is, right? But when you are at war, when your community is under attack, you have to use everything that is available for you, right, that you can actually do a pushback. And so we often tell people voting is not the end all and the be all, right? But we are doing harm reduction, right? And we need you, and we engage people in the conversation. The third thing I think that we do is that we actually use culture. We use music, we use food, we use a gathering, and we listen.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, folks don't like to listen to people in our community. Folks don't come to our communities and listen to us. They come to our communities and tell us how bad we are, how broke we are, how beat down things are, right? Our first point of contact when we're going to communities, we literally have a listening session. We sit there and we listen. And when you start listening, people know that there's an authentic relationship developing, they can also start tapping into their own power. And it's a process. It's a process, but what we've seen is a great engagement. In this last year, we were in the midterm election, we were able to engage 120 Black-led organizations in the Deep South. So they're out there. People are out there and they want to do the work. Oftentimes, they don't have the resources or the tools. They need the support. Sometimes they don't know how to enter the process. They need an entry point to enter the process, right? And then the third piece is oftentimes they need a frame. They need a frame of knowing what work or how can I make impact. Help me understand that. And so we've used those as our kind of on-ramp to get people engaged in the process.
One last question here. We've got to wrap up. But I love how you're positioning everything that you're saying around power. And we know that voting is the sort of starting, I think of voting as the starting gun of a race.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not gonna get you necessarily the end game that you want, but it's the start of the process. You got to be in the game to win the game, right? So what organizing are you doing with these communities after the vote so that they can hold the elected official, no matter who wins, accountable for what they want to see happen in their communities?
That's an excellent point. One of the things that we do is we actually have a network strategy. So instead of part of what we do is work, what is our ecosystem? And an ecosystem, I work in philanthropy, and oftentimes philanthropy will say, there's no infrastructure. There's always infrastructure. Black folks had infrastructure on plantations. Yeah. There was always a vehicle. No, it was. There was always an ecosystem to get things done. Somebody in the house, somebody in the field, somebody knew how to get to move the food, somebody knew how to cover when somebody was going to escape. So in that process, part of our strategy has been having a network strategy, connecting with partners like Black Women's Roundtable, the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative, other organizations that are existing long-term organizations, working with grassroots groups, pulling us together so that we can have some collective thought and collective strategy about this process.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, LaTosha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Keep up the good work, cousin.
Thank you. All right.
That's a powerhouse right there. Y'all don't know, you better tell somebody. Stay on panel with us. We're going to love to get your perspective on this next story, okay? So 3 important developments on the Republicans' relentless attack on the right to vote. A federal appeals court in Mississippi agrees that a state Senate district was drawn, in the words of the court, with the intent to dilute the power of the Black vote, and that the district needs to be redrawn for this year's election. That's good news. But now some bad news. In North Carolina, the Republican-appointed executive director of the State Board of Elections has not certified the student IDs at a dozen campuses at the University of North Carolina as qualifying as voter IDs. We checked with the state's largest HBCU, North Carolina A&T, my favorite uncle's alma mater. There we go. Their IDs did not qualify either. Keeping young people and Black people from voting is an important goal of the voter suppression movement. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a gerrymandering case from Virginia. A lower court ruled last year that 11 Virginia House of Delegate districts were racially gerrymandered. The GOP in Virginia appealed. Of course they did, right? The lower court ordered a new map based on the justices' questions and comments during the oral arguments. Observers think the court will not strike down racist gerrymandering. LaTosha, what do you think is going on here? I mean, it's like this is a fight that is never ending.
It is, and I think we have to recognize a couple of things. One, we have to recognize that we are entering an era of the browning of America. That as America becomes more brown, we're going to see this kind of aggressive nature. We've seen this in the South and in places where you've got concentrated numbers of black folks.
Right.
You're going to see this, right? And I think that we've got to take voter suppression and make that a major, major issue. If one of the pieces, if you look at what happened in Mississippi today, where a federal judge struck down the district in a Senate district in the state of Mississippi, if you look at that map, what's interesting about that map is that district, which primarily would be in the delta part of Mississippi, is over 320 miles long. Wow. That is ridiculous, right? But in an effort, they've gone over extraordinary measures, right, to marginalize the black vote. And so now they've got a month and a half that they've actually got to draw the district lines. But I think what is happening is what we're seeing this white supremacist agenda in action, right? We're seeing that it's going after power by any means necessary, that it is they're recognizing that there are, as more people engaged in the process, that is a threat to their power, right?
Absolutely.
I think we've got to see it as such as well,
Absolutely.
right? And we've got to tap into that.
Absolutely. So, Michael, from your background of working with the DNC, I mean, what sort of things can an organization like the DNC do to fight back when it's so clear that in their main constituency it's being targeted in this way?
Well, I hate to use this example. However, when my father was chair of the party, he used to always say, the Republicans come to the fight with a gun. We've always come with a knife. And listening to my cousin over here, that when you organize and give folks resources, you're leveling the playing field. So when you got to level the playing field, because GOP is not playing. They don't care. They want judgeships. And remember, I don't think people understand. That's what makes your job, I know, so difficult. When you're trying to get people to vote, and they don't understand that sometimes elections have consequences.
Absolutely.
People that draw these maps are people that got elected and or appointed by the person that got elected. And so when you sit home and say, oh, my vote didn't matter, or I didn't like Hillary for whatever reason, these are the consequences you got to deal with.
Right. Absolutely.
Right, but we don't break bread with the people in the GOP who could assist because they are of good conscience, good report, have integrity.
It's so hard to find them.
Voting. I mean, we got one. And to me, that's what matters because, I have a tremendous amount of respect for my brother right here.
Absolutely.
We disagree on almost everything, but he takes stands of principle. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so when we do the thing where it's like we liberals, them conservatives, and they're not as black, and they're not whatever, and they're not down in it makes me sick because we could have more people on the inside of what the GOP is doing to diffuse it while we're giving more power to the grassroots efforts, while we got like an ACP Legal Defense Fund going out and dispatching and bringing challenges. I mean, we gotta put this thing together. It's just the internal divisiveness is what at this point is killing it, because what the white man is doing is Custer's last stand.
Absolutely.
His days are numbered. But what are we gonna do?
Absolutely. I mean, that's an excellent point. I'm joking. That's an excellent point. So, Eugene, I'm interested because I would think, and I could be wrong, that you're probably taking a lot of incoming from other Republicans.
Tell me.
Okay?
Tell me.
So
But we welcome all smoke. We welcome all smoke.
Yeah.
The thing is this, and I agree with Monique. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. Gerrymandering, typically is going to hurt the black community. I mean, looking at Virginia, looking at Mississippi, looking at it in Maryland, our congressional map is currently being redrawn by a commission appointed by the governor. And, I think one of the best things that Governor Hogan could have done is ask, AG Holder's organization and President Obama's organization to come in and help them draw the map so that it's a fair and equitable map. But the GOP has to come to the table on the issue. I agree 100%. We should be working together on this issue, and black Republicans have a vested interest in seeing the black community thrive and seeing the black community have equitable representation at every level of government.
Well, I have to ask, do they really want our vote? Here's the thing.
I will say this. There are some that do. There's some that don't. I'll be honest about it. If you can have you ask J.C. Watts or K. Cole James or Michael Steele, that's absolutely. But the thing is this: as with anybody, I don't think black community should just hand the GOP your vote. I think the GOP needs to come and court you and work for the vote the same way they work for two-way votes, the same way they work for pro-life votes, the same way they work for any other votes, the same way they go out and stir up all the anti-immigrant feelings to get the crazy out there to vote. If the Republican Party, honestly, Ronna, we're talking to you because we know what's going on up in that building down there. They're serious about getting serious about courting black voters. You need to come and engage black voters on their terms, on their issues in their communities.
That's an excellent point. My fear, my concern, I would say concern over fear, is that I feel like we're seeing the reverse of history. South African apartheid was in many ways developed by looking at our Jim Crow system here. Yeah. And I think what's happening right now is that a lot of your party mates are looking at the white South African rule under apartheid and trying to figure out how can they apply that model here by disenfranchising the black vote in this country. Instead of working for our vote, they're trying to eliminate our vote. It's
systemically happening. You get a win in Florida with Desmond Meade, but then you get Brian Kemp who comes in and disenfranchise 50, 60, maybe possibly 100,000 voters in Georgia. You have North Carolina who's they're Roland says it's the last Alabama, it's the new Alabama. They're fighting hard. I mean they're fighting hard for that all time. Hey, we're going to disenfranchise black people, man.
Absolutely.
But the thing is this. It should be a nonpartisan issue, not bipartisan, nonpartisan issue, because it's something that affects black folk across the country.
Absolutely.
The model that gets implemented in Georgia is something that, hey, Chris Kobach in Kansas say, let's do it here. Then somebody in Iowa says, hey, let's do it here. It gets implemented, and it's not just implemented at the state level. They're bits and pieces that gets trickled down to the county level. Because the issue is this: we don't have a national election, we don't have state elections, we have thousands of county and municipal elections. And until we deal with it at that level, and it's going to take, working with hundreds of organizations that are, well-funded, talking to our white friends, that actually care about this issue, at the municipal level to protect the right to vote.
The emphasis is yes, and he is few and far between.
Yes.
There are more of them than there are of him.
Right.
And a prime example is when you watch some folks of color that go on and defend 45. You could say somebody said the N-word. They'll say, "What's the context?" That's kind of the thought. It's how can I got to defend him in some form or fashion.
I mean, they've done it here on
But
the show.
they're few and far between in terms of people who are out as spokespeople willing to speak up for the party. But there are so many, in the closet black Republicans, because we talked about it on the other show. The older you get, the more conservative you get. The Republicans are, to me, missing the boat because there are plenty of people who want to vote and probably secretly do vote because they're voting for their pockets. The more you make, the more you want to keep, the less you want to spend in taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So there are these issues that there could be common ground on, but on stuff like voting, GOP has to show up.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you
really quickly.
2018, Governor Larry Hogan gets almost 40% in Baltimore County, almost 50% in Prince George's County, about 45% in Montgomery County. These are two of the three of those are majority black jurisdictions.
Yep.
He didn't go in talking about divisive issues. He went in and talked to the communities there on their terms, on their issues. I mean, and it's a model that the GOP could apply anywhere in the country. Yeah. Treat black voters the same way you treat your voters that you actually care about. Show that you care, and then we'll maybe reward you with our vote.
Well, we're hearing some rumblings about him challenging Trump in the primary, so that would be interesting to see.
I'm all in for Hogan 2020.
All right, now. So let's go to a break.
A test of character is the amount of strain it can bear. Lawyer and civil rights activist Charles Hamilton Houston.
Our HBCU Giving Day school is Fort Valley State University, located in Fort Valley, Georgia, founded in 1895. Notable alumni include Rayfield Wright, Tyrone Poole, Calvin Smyrie, Nick Harper, Catherine Hardy, Lavender, and more. You can support Fort Valley State University by going to fvsu.edu. That's fvsu.edu. So last week, a lot of people I know were busily getting themselves off of flights with Boeing 737 MAX planes, including me. Not a problem this week after the U.S. grounded those planes after 2 of the planes crashed, killing all aboard, 1 in Indonesia and 1 in Ethiopia. But why was the United States the last to ban the planes? Because it's our company, right? Should we have been worried in the first place? Joining us now to talk about that is airport security expert Dr. Stacy Tyler. Hi there, Dr. Tyler.
Hi, how are you?
I am wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So, first of all, I'm just curious, should we feel safe getting on any plane right about now? Because it just seems like there was really a very slow rollout of the U.S. getting on board of grounding those planes in order to prioritize the safety of customers.
Well, that's a two-part question. And right now that the United States was the last to actually ground those 737 MAX 8 aircraft. But you got to understand, the plane that went down in Indonesia, Lion Air, that airline is the largest low-cost carrier that's in the Asia Pacific market. But however, since 2002, they had 15 incidences, aircraft crashes or incidences per se.
Wow.
The European Union banned Lion Air from flying into their European airspace, okay? So you have Ethiopian Airline, and they are the largest African airline. But however, they have liberalization concerns, a lot of restrictions in order for them to operate. Their operating costs are high. Their taxes are high. They don't have the resources to assist in their flying in Africa. So the United States looked at those factors as far as, oh, it happened in Africa and it happened in Indonesia. But however, other countries took the liberty to ground those 737 MAX 8 jets, UK, Canada, Indonesia, and the likes. But the United States took their time just to find out if that the information from the black box, which deemed that it had similarities according to the plane that went down in Indonesia. So therefore, so that's why the United States took the liberty as far as grounding. And you got to understand that it's an economic factor, because when you ground those planes, that's money that they're losing on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I think that last factor is probably the biggest one, but that's just me.
Correct.
And I will say, I fly in Africa frequently, and I understand that Ethiopian Airlines is one of the best airlines really in the world. So I don't want us to stigmatize African airlines as if they're somehow deficient compared to other countries. Now, when I think of, what I've been hearing about this is that it seems like in both the Indonesian crash and the Ethiopian crash, that it sounded like the pilots were trying to regain control of the plane from the automatic pilot function, which to me seems suspicious that both of them were struggling in the same way right before the crash. So does that indicate that there is some malfunction with those planes?
Absolutely. And that's the stall prevention system that you're referring to. The same information, the same situation that happened with Lion Air was very similar to Ethiopian Airlines, which the plane was taking off, but in a roller coaster like altitude change.
Oh my God.
Okay, so therefore, with that information that came out from the black box, that really deemed the decision for the United States to ground the 737 MAX 8 aircraft.
Right. Well, we're glad that they finally came to that decision, and we're looking forward to get some resolution on this so that we can all be safe in the air. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Avis, for having me.
Absolutely. And that is it for this edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. Roland will be back tomorrow, and my bad voice will be gone. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Holla.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio.